Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is going to be Day 9 Daily 42 in just a moment, and today is December 5th, 2010, I think. Let me just open up my calendar to make sure I didn't lie. That's right. It is December 5th, 2010, and we're going to be doing Upmagic versus Perfectman today because I noticed I haven't really been doing that many Terran versus Protosses lately because most teams send out 2 Zergs in the Pro League matches. So that means that most of the games have Zerg in them. So I've just sort of been picking the best match of the previous night, which coincidentally has apparently been almost always a Zerg versus Terran. So I didn't realize I love that matchup so much, or that it could be so consistently kick-ass. But before we do anything regarding this game, I'll be doing a cast for the Team Liquid Star League at 11 a.m. on Sunday Pacific time. That's 2 p.m. Eastern time. And that will also be taking place in other time zones as well. But I don't really know the exact time at 0 GMT. I should probably figure that out. But yeah, I'll be casting then, so it's at 11 a.m. So any of the people who are in America, just skip church and watch my cast. It's really important because honestly, praying to Jesus isn't going to get you better at StarCraft, right? No, I'm just kidding. I respect your religion, but seriously, show up to the cast, right? So that's going to be awesome. That'll be totally sweet. And also, before we started, someone in the chat, aka Hart, was asking how I chose my name Day 9. It's because way back in the past, there was this clan called Nine that had 9 Everlast and Kane 9. They had that same brackets and that sort of thing. And when I was really bad at StarCraft, this is way back when my alias in this game was Sleeping Drone. That was the alias I used in the 2001 WCG. And I was really bad then, and I thought, man, I'm going to audition for the Team 9. This is like the word I use, right? Like it's a play or something. But so I wanted to audition for Team 9, and then of course it eventually dissolved, and not much was heard of it for a while. So after a while I wanted to not be Sleeping Drone, because I didn't want some cutesy phrase. I wanted a nice manly name, like one word that was awesome, because it's like Reach, Yellow, Boxer, These really sweet manly names are just like one word. So Day is one of my favorite words. I chose that. And at this time, I actually had forgotten about the Team 9. I'd forgotten about Kane 9 and 9 Everlast. But 9 was my favorite number, so I put a 9 there. But somehow Day 9 was taken. There was another nerd who's exactly like me, who loved those words, smacked them together, and I just put brackets around it. And then like a week later, I realized that, hey, I made it into Team 9, right? And then I started like just basically saying like, oh yeah, I'm the moderator of Team 9. And then my brother became Tasteless 9, and Wisdom became RS Wisdom 9 way back when I was in the Team RS. So yeah, that's who I am. That's how I came to be. That was the story of me way back when I was a little nerd. But now let's go ahead and jump right into this Terran vs. Protoss. It's a really sweet game on Match Point. I've only seen a few glimpses of this, so most of this is going to be blind, but still, I recall what I saw as being awesome. So let's look a little bit at the map. Just a few key things to note in this matchup. The first one is this big high ground pod for Terran. This is going to be really important when it comes to defending this expansion, because if you look at this entrance up here, I mean, there's a fat entrance here, but then there's this really thin thing up here, so Protoss can't exactly walk here to kill off this expansion with a ton of units, because first of all, the whole bunch of units will get funneled right there, but more importantly, Vultures can just sort of go joink down here and plant some mines, and Terran also has a nice small region to clog that up with. But once Terran does end up with these 4 expansions, which is obviously very typical, he needs to worry a lot about recalls, especially now that this newer version of Match Point has this little bit of extra space there, just to kind of allow for drops a little bit better. But, if Terran has to wander back and forth along this region, even though it's almost a straight line, just this little bit of a crook up and then back down makes it really cumbersome to deal with. So typically what we see a lot of Terrans do is focus on turtling these 4 expansions as best they can, and then simply positioning a few tanks, just sort of bleeding off this high ground pod, just sort of leaking down here to prevent the Protoss from taking this one, and then pushing aggressively up here if Protoss tries to take that one. Alternatively, they can even just put tanks there and just sort of, bounce on over. But essentially preventing the Protoss from getting these 2 expansions. You see a lot of big starvation revolving around these 2 expansions. Now, Protoss, on the other hand, has quite a few options on this map. Early expands are pretty much safe on this map. I mean, even though this is a fairly close push distance, you can control this small ramp relatively easily. Protosses always have to be aware, though, of any push that can assault this key area right here, because if you put tanks here, they can easily demolish this Protoss expansion, super easily. So in fact, a lot of Terrans, when they get real aggressive, they move their units up to this pod forward, and then they just cut here, sit down, and cut off mining from here, and just starve Protoss for a little bit on these two bases, before they sort of wiggle up and then push around. A reasonable question is, why not push up here? It can be very difficult when you're pushing up in a straight line and there's this really big Protoss concave, but that is a reasonable alternative to do. So, two base Arbiter's fine on this map, playing very typically and doing some Reaver harass can be also very fine on that map. So without further ado, let us jump right into the game. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it up a little bit because I consistently have it a little bit too soft so you can't hear the game sound effects, but don't worry, I've turned it up nice and loud so you can hear the sweet grinding on that guitar. I guess Perfectman is, one of those players who changes his name every 2 weeks and is now Future, but I'm still going to be calling him Perfectman. So we have Upmagic spawning in the bottom left and accidentally has a worker going haywire right at the start of the game. And we have the Protoss pieces for Perfectman popping out at the top right. Man, pro gamers are getting younger and younger these days. Start having toddlers with little shakers up at the computer screens. Uh-oh. So we do have a little bit of a cheesy opening coming up right here. But one thing to note, I'm not going to pause this, I'm just going to briefly go over here. Any sort of proxy gateway opening is fairly stable, actually. If you plant gateways here and advance like that, I'm curious to see where this Protoss is going to be placing that gateway, but it's definitely something that is really aggressive, but has a very stable follow-through. I mean, even if you end up losing the gateway because the Terran player brings 5 SCVs and kills it off in time, the Terran player still is sacking 5 SCVs on mining for a fairly significant amount of time. So that is, pretty nice advantage already there. So let's see where the Protoss does plan on placing it. Everything's very normal from the Terran point of view. You don't really need a wall in. We did see Upmagic in his game. In his game against, who was it? Who was the player? He just played it a few days ago. I can't remember who it was now that I think of it. May have been Jangbi or someone. But, oh no, it was Movie. There we go, thank you. So, it was Upmagic against Movie. Upmagic did, instead of building his first supply depot in his main, he built it at the expansion because, again, it's pretty safe to early expand for either race on this map. So what Upmagic did is he just built a usual wall right there and expanded almost immediately. Another very, very common opening that, totally reasonable to employ on this map. But so we here, in fact, see not a proxy gateway, but instead a gas steal. So this is something that is, real typical in this matchup. My brother loves doing a gas steal. That is the infamous Tasteless 9. Loves doing the gas steal. But what's important to note is that notice how this was a very clearly designed component of the Protoss build, right? The Protoss wasn't scouting around and said, oh my goodness, I can take a gas, and then took it. He clearly deliberately sent that probe very early on. And that's a real important thing to note, is that there's a lot of these cute tactics that you'll see, like for instance yesterday where we were watching Zero do a nice little Mutalisk Lurker tactic at Flash's expansion. Right here we see the gas being stolen, or sometimes we see Manor Pylons going down in Protoss vs. Protoss, and very occasionally on Protoss vs. Terran as well. All of these, though they look cool, should never be something that you decide to do on the fly. They should be something you have planned out as part of your build order. Because having 100 minerals not in the bank early on is pretty significant. And a lot of times you'll see players do stuff like this and it'll backfire. The most classic example is a player who says, oh my god, this Zerg player's building his hatch here, I guess I can cannon rush him and he won't notice. And the Protoss player cannon rushes, kills off the hatch, convinces himself he's won, but then loses to Mutalisks because all his tech was delayed by that money spent on that early harassment. So we see everything being as normal as can be in the Protoss space. He's not doing any zany follow-through. Now, as Terran, you shouldn't necessarily overreact. In classical times, way back in the early dawn of time, aka about 2002, players would bring 5, sometimes even 6 SCVs off mining to kill off that geyser. And that is an egregious mistake. Do not do that. Oh my god, I feel like I'm watching a Protoss vs. Zerg. Look at the Manor Pylon at the expo. So awesome. But anyways, completely lost my train of thought, so hopefully that train will come back in a little bit. Oh yeah, they would bring 5 or 6 SCVs off mining, and that's pretty significant because That sort of player is thinking, oh my god, I desperately need gas. I absolutely need to get this gas. You know, my entire matchup depends on me getting this gas early. But then they would sack all the minerals, which of course are equally important in getting tanks and all these sorts of things. And they would end up getting a much later factory anyways. I like this sort of response. We saw Flash do this against Stork in the Ever OSL. We're seeing Upmagic do it right here, which is just to expand normally. Flash did opt to build the barracks before the command center, which I prefer a little bit more. We're going to see how Upmagic plays this out. He deals with quite a bit of early pressure from Perfectman. But still, what I like about this is what I call sidestepping. The Protoss player is investing all this money to put you behind in gas, so you respond by doing a build that doesn't even require gas in the first place. Early expanding like this does not revolve around getting your geyser early on, so by employing that strategy, you end up, you essentially say, hey Protoss, you just wasted 100 minerals on that because it never affected me in the first place. And look, he's getting his geyser right here instead. The Terran player literally has not been slowed by this gas geyser. He is being slowed by this pylon, but from the gas geyser's point of view, he's in good shape. So of course the Protoss is going to be doing a little bit of pressure early on, but what I find interesting is that the Protoss delayed gas himself and is now moving in with Zealots and is expanding. So again, let's think about what I was saying at the outset of the game. The Protoss player should never steal the gas as just, something to do on a whim. It should be some planned part of the build, and we're seeing this plan unfold right here. The Protoss player takes the gas geyser, gets his gateway, but is not rushing straight for Dragoons and returning to something standard. Instead, he's seeing the response from his Terran opponent, which is to early expand very quickly, and the way that the Protoss is going to reply to this is to make a whole bunch of Zealots out of the gateway and put pressure on just the one barracks worth of Marines early on, and go ahead and expand himself because he knows that the factory is going to be delayed. You obviously couldn't do this sort of early Zealot, early expand type thing on any other map, in any other situation. Because obviously the Terran player would just push you quickly with Vultures, and you'd have nothing but slow Zealots and Probes, which would obviously lose it for you. So look at the way that Upmagic's doing this, right? He's just continuing to mine gas from there. He did end up building a bunker at the front, and the one criticism I would say is pretty bad that Upmagic's doing right here. Oh yeah, Manor Pylon, totally awesome. Hopefully we'll manage to get back up here to the front. Obviously, very nice micro by Upmagic. But yeah, this building placement bothers me quite a bit. I feel like there could be the barracks placed here. There could be a supply depot placed here. And then there would be this thin crack for any units to get in and out if Upmagic wanted to. And then obviously Upmagic can mine this out to have units move in the later stages of the game. So that bothers me quite a bit. Oh, green tea is always so fantastic. So I feel like this Zealot harass, even though I think it's an appropriate response from Perfectman, and I endorse it fully, I think that it's doing a little bit more damage than it should. I think that Upmagic perhaps wasn't as prepared to do this response as he, ordinarily would if he'd, considered this early gas steal and then this early Zealot pressure. And again, that's another thing that's very nice about this strategy that's being employed by Perfectman. It's a little bit unorthodox. And anytime you're doing unorthodox, you should assume your opponent has a very good response to it. You should assume that your opponent is going to respond properly. Because if your opponent... Let me rephrase that. Yeah, you should assume your opponent is going to respond properly. So that way, if your opponent does respond properly, you're not screwed. You can't have your entire build rely only on surprise. But the added benefit is that you can always surprise the opponent and throw them off a little bit more. It's like a potential advantage is how I like to describe it. And this was absolutely brilliant by Upmagic. He's trying to move this barracks over to get a nice solid wall off on the left. The Zealots move in, and he's building a barracks really quickly to create a tight wall with this supply depot. So again, unorthodox strategies like this gas steal have very natural sort of continuations as Protoss. This sort of early expand and these sort of Zealot harass is very, very natural when you're playing it. But from Upmagic's point of view, Upmagic's probably practiced against every other possible opening, except maybe not this one. So as a result, Perfectman might have a little bit of an extra boost, and we saw that extra boost play out with that early Zealot harass. So again, this is continuing to illustrate what's nice about Upmagic's response. He didn't need that second gas early, at all, and only now, he only needed to take 3 SCVs off. Oh, sorry, I'm having a handful of hiccups, so hopefully I'll have an increasingly comical little analysis-aroo. And Protoss is naturally responding completely correctly, taking this expansion up here, just continuing to take more and more bases. I think a reasonable question, though, is why is he taking this expansion up here and not opting for this expansion right here? Well, this narrow choke allows you to control, harass really, really well. It's those big pushes we're starting to worry about. So if Perfectman can get these bases established and be very aggressive, think of the path that Perfectman is going to take in being aggressive, right? He's going to be moving up this way and then down like this. Again, you want to be moving down this way because this fat ramp gives maximum space for your Zealots and your Dragoons to move. So if you're moving along this path, this expansion becomes very, very well defended if you have the aggressive advantage. And also, another one of these potential advantages, that top expansion is rarely scouted, so it's a nice little surprise expo that Protoss can take. And what I like about what Protoss is doing is he's blocking, those early Zealots he was harassing with is blocking one entrance, and he has the Dragoon at the other to block any sort of scouts. And now Perfectman's doing everything completely normally. Notice that there were 3 Nexuses before this robotics facility. This is actually really similar to what Stork did against Flash, when Stork stole Flash's gas, and Flash did a very similar early expansion. Stork was able to take a 3rd Nexus very early on before his robotics facility, because you know that absolutely no big harassment is going to happen early on because your opponent didn't get gas very quickly, so there's not really going to be any harassment right around the corner. So this is another way of exploiting that, right? We don't need that robotic facility early for the observers because we know there's not going to be any vultures coming out anytime soon. The Terran almost certainly needs to make 2 or 3 tanks before he's comfortable doing something else. So really, really enjoy that response by Perfectman. And also, anytime you're in this situation, I really do recommend scouting these expansions. So we do see an SCV wandering down here, and there's another SCV here. This really is the hallmark of an expert player, being able to actively scout this sort of very, very weird expansion placement. Because, you know, 1 out of 100 games, someone will do this, and it'll give you a loss. And if you're, you know, really responsible about sending your SCVs out, you'll be in good shape. So you'll notice that everything that Upmagic is doing is very standard defensive power-oriented. He's getting the Academy early on to deal with Dark Templar and to do a little bit of scouting himself, to do a little bit of scanning around. He has the 2 factories for defense, for the tanks. He's also getting the engineering bay to get some turrets. This bothers me a little bit, how late the probe transfer is here. But, you know, no big deal. They'll get there eventually. But this is another thing that I like about Upmagic is Upmagic's a very free-form player a lot of the times, and you'll notice that he's immediately taking this Mineral Natural. That's an excellent response on the fly. He sees his opponent taking this top expansion. He knows there can't be that many units there, or actually really anywhere on the map, so he's going to go ahead and expand himself. And he's getting a little aggressive with these early units because he can, right? He knows his opponent. He's going to be fairly low on units. He had to have sacrificed getting that engineering bay, or excuse me, getting that robotics bay late, so there's no Reaver right around the corner. But watch the way Upmagic's going to do this. This attack is not going to be some super aggressive trying to win it now. He's just going to get into a very good position. So again, going for this key location right here by this expansion. Killing him off, taking out the Zealots, and the Dragoons are trying to come back. I hope they get there because Dragoon AI is the worst known to man. And look at this is so subtle. But in the midst of all this chaos, this is where, you know, in actually 90% of matches, observers won't even catch this little SCV sneaking in, right? This is where all the focus of both players is, you know, almost exclusively. But then look at this little thing Upmagic does. This is so high level. Look. Sneaking an SCV in there. That's a hell of an aggressive way to scout, right? You do a huge, gigantic push at the most vulnerable location for Protoss, and really, if you can get that SCV in, you're going to be in good shape. So notice how focused that this Terran player is going to be. Just continuing to send units straight to this location. You can see the engineering bay floating. So this is a nice little combination attack. This attack is not designed to win the game immediately. It's designed to push the Protoss back, get a little bit of ground advantage, and set up this expansion. We see on the minimap, we see some more factories going down, but for the most part, yes, for the most part, this is a 2-factory push. And in general, when you want to start being aggressive like this, you build up some number of tanks. In this case, it was 3 tanks for Upmagic. And then you proceed to make only vultures. Vultures are the unit that allow you to be aggressive. Tank are the units that allow you to be muscular and allow you to hold off a lot of units. But vultures are what's going to let you push forward, especially in low numbers. Vultures are particularly dangerous because they can plant all these mines. And look at this brilliant tank placement. This is absolutely incredible placement because these Dragoons are still having trouble reaching that tank all the way. But the tank is just barely in range of these minerals. A lot of Terran players would just waltz the tank right here. But of course it can be easily shot down by Dragoons, and pretty safely shot down by Dragoons because of the high ground. Little stuff like that is what really stretches the advantage out. And notice how thinly Upmagic is spreading things out. To kill off this expansion, he's just leaving his Marines up there. Look at that, just the Marines. Some nice micro by Perfectman, but very clearly we see Upmagic's pretty much at the advantage right now. And, sending some vultures in. This is another good continuation. Anytime unit numbers are low, vultures are very dangerous. And obviously if you have... Alright, we're going to see him. Look at him shaking with fear. Yeah, all players are always stoic. Ooh, got a little probe there, that's pretty good. But this vulture harass is always good if unit count's low. But in addition, we have this little push going here, which, commits some units for the Protoss to deal with that. So we do see that little snuck expansion has a handful of difficulties right now because it's dead. So this sort of thing, even though I can understand the explanations for it, and I don't mind taking this expansion every now and again, perhaps Perfectman would have been a little bit safer had he expanded to that right expansion. But even then, I still think this sort of push would have been very effective for Upmagic, because really, Upmagic is exploiting the lack of units in the delayed robotics facility. Because look, these observers came out real late, making these mines increasingly obnoxious to deal with. So look at this. Again, that push was not designed to kill Perfectman. There was one tank that maybe shot down a handful of probes. We got some guys, some vultures in there killing off some probes. We managed to take out a Nexus. But the big key is the fact that Upmagic now has this expansion up here. Almost certainly has an upgrader going somewhere. It should be an armory or two building. Because we see a starport at the south side of the map. And then Perfectman is now transitioning into a fairly normal game plan. Yep, so there's the two armories going down. Nice positioning right here. Anytime you're low on units, you do kind of need quite a few units before you can move up here and comfortably secure it. But you don't really need to secure this high ground pod as Terran until you're starting to take this expansion. You can just keep things nice and tucked back away there. So that way your opponent can't exploit this high ground advantage too much. We have one tank just doing its own thing. No big deal. That's a special scout tank. Sometimes you just gotta find out what's up with a tank because an SCV just won't cut it. And this is also good by the Protoss, right? Because after any sort of big aggressive harassment from Terran, Terran himself is going to be low on units. So you did hear me say that whenever the Protoss is low on units, that vulture harass becomes increasingly dangerous. But now it's Protoss' turn to exploit how low the Terran will be on units. Because the Terran has pretty much been making only vultures from these two factories to do all this harassment. And there's this real vulnerable period after you see that sort of thing where the Terran starts to need to replenish tanks. And it does take quite some time for two factories to pump out 4 tanks. I mean, you're used to having pairs of vultures coming out very rapidly, but you really do need 4, 5, 6 tanks before you're really fully secured. So in that period, there's a pretty significant window where Protoss can do a lot of damage. A great example of this was Fantasy against some Protoss on Neo Medusa, where Fantasy spawned at the top left, and the Protoss, I believe it was Zhongbi, spawned at the right position. Pretty sure it's Zhongbi, but Fantasy was doing tons of damage with his early push. He did an early 2-factory push, I believe. Was doing tons of damage. He managed to get behind Zhongbi's mineral line and was killing off a ton of probes, and Zhongbi barely held it off, and then just turned around and immediately killed Fantasy, right? Like, instantaneously killed him. Because Fantasy only had 1 tank at his expansion. So Zhongbi just waltzed 5 Dragoons right up there, killed off the tank, and then proceeded to win the game. So that's something you need to be really careful about if you're Terran in this situation, about this sort of Dragoon Reaver push potentially killing you right now. At the very least, Protoss should focus on doing some damage. It's a very important concept to exploit a lot as Protoss. After a Terran does a lot of damage to you with some sort of early push, right as you hold it off, there are some key windows. Is this legal? I'm not sure if this observer turret bug is legal. I know it's banned in a lot of foreigner tournaments, but you can always unglitch the turret by spamming the stop button, and it'll eventually untwist and kill off the observer. So here, this is a little bit bad by Upmagic that there was no turret lying around here, but oh, never mind, there's some Goliaths. You do kind of need to get those Goliaths a little earlier. I dislike this path that the shuttle is taking. I would have preferred for it to just sort of get out of there. But we're clearly seeing that Perfectman has really good knowledge of what's going on in his opponent's base and is very comfortable with that. When I say I would get out of there, that's because I'm kind of a wuss. But, you know, really, if you can get away with those extra few moves to maybe make the SCVs run a little bit more, that's obviously very good. But just to make sure I'm clear, your number one goal should be to not lose that shuttle. If you lose the shuttle with the Reaver, you're basically inviting Terran to push you immediately. So, one thing I do want to mention about the way that Perfectman responded after losing this expansion, you'll note right back here, this is the big thing I noticed. So here we go, we're going to look at the Dragoons. We're going to see this expansion here, this is significant, and then look at this. Okay, look at this, there we go. These are 3 new gateways, and up here are 4 gateways. 2 of them are off the screen, but there are 4 gateways right here. When Protoss had taken this expansion and just had his main, his natural, and this top base, he built up to 4 gateways. And when he lost this expansion, you'll note that he stuck to 4 gateways and then expanded here, and still with 4 gateways, expanded again. And now, only now is he adding on those additional gateways. It's a pretty big thing to note. A lot of players will add on 1 base, and then be like, oh man, I really got to start making units because he's going to be pushing me soon, and then they won't be willing to expand again. But I definitely commend Perfectman, that's a good follow through, a good little response after losing that top base. And obviously, part of what allowed Perfectman to do this, excuse me, is the fact that he was using this shuttle and Reaver to put pressure on the front. And you will notice that he was putting a lot of pressure on the front, right? First he was dropping these tanks up here, and then he came down to the SCVs here, and then threatened the SCVs of the natural expansion. Excellent, excellent, excellent job by Perfectman. Now, one thing that might feel weird of what Upmagic is doing is the fact that he's just sitting on his ass, right? He just has these 3 bases, and he literally, after the death of this push, has not even crossed this line of the map. He stayed on like his 5th of the map for an incredibly long time. And that is because of the fundamental idea behind harassment. If you harass, namely to do all this damage to the workers right here and here, when you harass, you've damaged his worker count, which means that his economy is going to be weak later, right? In 5 minutes, he will have like 1,000 less money than he normally would have, which is like 10 less zealots or 8 less dragoons. So that means that if you do a lot of damage with harassment, you need to wait a little bit for that key period of time to come around where you can end up attacking your opponent and having like a really nice advantage. And right now we're starting to see that the Terran player is just going to let his economy build up and is going to continue maintaining that economic lead over his opponent. A lot of players will do a harassment, like very classically we'll have a Protoss player do a drop with Reavers or do a storm drop and kill off a bunch of Terran SCVs and then immediately try to bust in the front and attack. But of course, the Terran was at maximum economy making all those units and only just got hindered. So you're basically, if you attack now, hitting him when he has as many units as he can possibly have. If you wait 5 or 6 minutes, now we're starting to see the lack of his units kick in. We're starting to see that there were a few factories that couldn't produce that entire time. So it's very good after you've done a ton of damage to just sort of chill back and feel very comfortable. This is also very important concept in all the other matchups as well. Protoss versus Protoss. If you have a huge battle and you kill off all your opponent's units, then you can go ahead and take another expansion very comfortably. If you do a storm drop and kill off a whole bunch of his units, just get control of your half of the map and take another expansion. In Zerg vs. Terran, if you kill off the first Terran push, just comfortably take another expansion and sit back. Nothing wrong with taking the passive approach. In fact, the passive, doing passive actions is what allows you, or the passive actions after the aggression is what helps you win the game. Not just pure unbridled aggression, not just like getting up in your opponent's face for no reason, but using that aggression to plan out these long periods of building up a ton of units. So yeah, we see that there is now the Forge continuing to upgrade. This is really good what we're seeing up there at the top corner, just walling off that top with units. See some more scans going down. At this stage of the game, especially when you're not pushing as Terran, when you're just hanging out here, you have 3 scanners, or now a 4th at that top left. Make sure you're using those scanners just to periodically check your opponent's base, and you'll be surprised at how quickly those build up. You know, you don't really need to be doing scans around these areas to keep track of his army movements. You just need to really keep track of when he's getting arbiters and or carriers. And of course, before you plan on pushing, you just start saving up scans, so that way you can have just 3 or 4 scan to deal with some DTs. So we do see Terran moving up and then down across like this. Not quite enough space to be moving down these tiny alleys. This big center path is where you're going to end up attacking. And this is always really good. Whenever you're advancing somewhere, mine up your flanks. So that way you restrict the Protoss player to attack you along the lanes that you want. And also, in terms of the Protoss unit composition, notice how there's almost all Dragoons. The Protoss obviously isn't going to attack, unless, of course, his Dragoons decide to do their own thing, which is very common for Dragoons, because they're the dumbest units in America. But yeah, so making tons and tons of Dragoons, this allows you to control Vulture Harass, and only now are we going to start to see a whole ton of Vultures come in. Also, if you're behind, like if you've lost this expansion, getting Templar with Storm relatively quickly is also an excellent, excellent, excellent response. I like that quite a bit. Uh-oh, looks like we're going to see some carriers. So this is a really important thing to do, just to have a few Templar come out if you're feeling a little bit behind. Normally, actually I'm going to stop to talk about this for just a moment. Normally, you might say, well, why don't I do that? Every game is Protoss. And the answer is that if you have a big ground army of like Dragoons and Zealots, pretty early on, it allows you to expand a whole bunch because it's a very mobile army. So you can get that resource advantage, which obviously is like the most important advantage in StarCraft. But if you've been put behind and you can't get 4 or 5 bases against your Terran opponent, you can only get 3 or 4, you're obviously not going to have enough Dragoons and Zealots to deal with the push immediately, so you should go ahead and get the Templar. If you're in the advantage where you can continue expanding with Dragoons and Zealots, if you get Templar, that slows your expanding down a little bit. So, in a sense, if you try to get Templar when you could have expanded, you're sacrificing a little bit there. And I think it's more important to go ahead and get that expansion. But especially if you're feeling a little bit behind, I think that's an excellent, excellent response to do as Protoss. Just to get a little bit of extra storm in there to help you hold off that big first push. And again, once you hold off that push, you should feel like you're in a nice, normal spot to continue with your plan of getting a whole bunch of arbiters, or getting a bunch of carriers, or expanding more, that sort of thing. It looks like Protoss was going for just a storm drop. By storm drop, I mean a losing shuttle drop. And storm drops are great. I think they're fine. I enjoy them quite a bit. But you gotta be a little bit careful, because storm drops are one of the easiest to backfire things in the world, especially in this matchup. I prefer having like a shuttle with stormers in it, so it looks like the Protoss was prepared. I just want to make sure that wasn't his only shuttle. That's a pretty big mistake a lot of Protoss players end up making, is that they have the shuttle here, they get the Templar to prepare for the big attack, and then they go, well, I may as well just give a storm drop a shot, and then they try to do the storm drop, and unfortunately they have, no stormers when this big push actually ends up happening. So notice how few units this Protoss player actually seems to have. He's trying to do a little bit of damage here, but it's really not going to end up holding that much. And notice that the reason this push is so strong is because of that damage that Terran did early on. He waited a very long time to push out. We're almost at the 18-minute mark, right? But still, that's the sort of thing that you need to do. To do it like any aggression you do early, you want to have some push that happens later in the game. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to judge precisely when that will happen. I mean, it obviously won't be like a timing push where I'm going to move out exactly, 10 minutes and 30 seconds. But if you start becoming comfortable with consistently doing little harassment bits here and there, you can start to sense, like if you rewatch your replays, you'll realize that, it's even though it's not happening, in a 15-second window, it's still happening in about, a 2-minute window or maybe a 90-second window. And that's still significant enough for you to be able to, consistently exploit your opponent without any, big concerns. And we have the usual thing going on for Protoss, trying to do some storms, some desperation stuff. And a natural question is, why did this Protoss go carriers instead of going for arbiters? Excuse me. Yeah, I need to make sure that I swallow before I end up inhaling. Jesus, there we go. But yeah, carriers are a reasonable just plan to do on this map. There's some nice terrain that you can abuse with it, just using these 3 bases. And a lot of times what will happen is you'll be Perfectman and you'll have a plan to go carriers in the mid to late stages of the game, but you'll get screwed up before then. Oh, excuse me. God, there's those hiccups coming back. Excuse me. And I don't recommend abandoning your plan completely. I think it's okay to try to continue to stick with it. I do think, though, that if he'd went Arbiters, he still would have had a ton of trouble with this push. I think that no matter what he ended up doing after that early harassment, as long as Upmagic is patient with his army and patient with expanding and waits a little bit before he goes and attacks, then he'll be able to do a pretty significant amount of damage. I think Protoss may have wanted to do a little bit more damage at this top left, maybe keep an eye on that a little bit. He probably could have gotten a few more gateways. I would prefer to flood with gateways before rushing for carriers like that. And honestly, if you're behind and you're low on bases, I think that Arbiter is a little bit more effective than carriers. Carriers are okay as long as you have enough units to stay alive, and you can be well defended for a fairly significant amount of time. Because obviously carriers are so expensive, and not only does the unit take a long time to build, but then you have to build, a bazillion interceptors, and that takes time. And this is just very simple cleanup. So we're going to go ahead and slide on through the game, and yeah, we have some nice little micro going on. And now we're starting to see why carriers are just this really awesome unit. I mean, look, right now, Protoss has been screwed for quite some time, but the fact that he has this many carriers means that he can abuse this terrain for long enough time. So if you think about it, if you're Perfectman, and you didn't get, like, super Mondo kill... Whoa, that's a little bit extreme. Maybe he's planning on doing the land lift bug, where you can squash interceptors. That's a pretty cool one. But yeah... You'll know that if you were Perfectman, and you managed to stay alive, you managed to not lose this expansion up here, and didn't have all this probe harass done at your natural and in your main, if you did everything you did the same way, you'd be getting those carriers out at about the right time, You'd be able to stay alive by controlling your high ground pod, and then get these carriers, and you'd be able to do these nice little pushes through the middle and bouncing back between these thin, narrow lanes, and of course, along the middle with the rest of your army. So, of course, Perfectman's going to waltz his carriers up and do a little bit of sacrifice, because we do see players have been doing that increasingly, that instead of leaving right away, they wait for whatever's totally sweet to happen, and then they just let that happen. It's like Zerg players letting themselves get nuked before they say GG. I greatly appreciate that sort of thing. Oh, man, so Kinky already had a question ready, because when I unmuted the chat, bam, it came up like 1 nanosecond later, so I'll definitely take that one. So Kinky says, in last night's games... Really versus NBS and Upmagic versus Movie. I haven't seen the game versus NBS, but hopefully I'll watch it after this. So both Terrans decided to do a bunker expand. In Really's case, however, he decided not to wall at his NAT and only had a bunker at his expansion. And NBS took advantage of this by having 4 goons attack the bunker, forcing Really to take 4 SCVs off mining to repair for almost 2 minutes. I feel like this really negated the advantage of getting the command center up earlier. What are your thoughts on doing a bunker expansion as opposed to the safer siege expand, or the FD? So I think that I think they're all pretty good as long as you can pull them off. Normally, if you end up doing the bunker expand, it's because you got the command center so early that your siege, your tanks were a little bit delayed. So in a sense, the way you can think about it is that the Terran player is expanding and gaining some economic lead by expanding so early, and then sacrificing some of that, not all of it, but some of it to repair. When you compare this to a siege expand, like a wall-off siege expand, you're actually getting the command center a little bit later in that circumstance. And even if you decide to do it the same way, even if you decide to do the 1 bunker expand, but instead wall off, you still are going to have 4 to 5 SCVs mining. So again, to compare those two, if you go siege, if you go for the factory and then the command center, you don't get the economic swing forward from the command center. I'm going to try that one more time. Yeah, so if you siege and then you go for the expansion, you don't get the economic advantage of the getting the command center so early. but you end up being a little bit safer. You don't have to repair so much stuff. If you go ahead and expand early, you get that economically, but you have to sacrifice some to repair, so it kind of balances out. That was delicious. What is kind of nice, each of them have their advantages. So, for instance, if my opponent was going for some sort of 14 command center build, 14 Nexus build, or 12 Nexus, and I'm 14 command centering, and then using a bunker to defend, in that case, I don't even have to do a bunch of repairing at my front, so I'm in totally good shape, whereas the Siege Expand might have a little bit more trouble with that. But if I went Siege Expand, I have a little bit of an advantage against someone who's going like Robo, Super Cheese or something like that. So they have their trade-offs, but I think they're fairly equivalent things that you should choose based upon your personal preference. I really have a lot of faith in most openings nowadays. Most good openings have excellent responses regardless. So as long as you know those responses and you're doing a consistent, logically play style, then I think you're going to be in good shape. So 1A2A3A Pro says, why was Upmagic's harass so effective? Was Perfectman too greedy? And if so, where did he go too far? I think he was a little bit greedy when he was taking that top expansion, and I think that he was convinced that he would be able to sneak that expansion in, it wouldn't be spotted, and then he'd get this Mondo lead. So a lot of times when you do that sort of build as Upmagic, as Perfectman, when you do that sort of gas steal and then you harass the front, you have zealots running everywhere, you've intimidated your opponent. Your opponent's scared to move out. Your opponent's getting ready to deal with robotics facility harass, getting ready to deal with Dark Templar harass, so he ends up making too many tanks, and sometimes they'll end up turtling a little bit more than they ordinarily would. But Upmagic clearly wasn't going to fall for that. We saw him send 2 SCVs out really early to check around. And then once Upmagic spotted the expansion, he just went straight into push mode. And that's what I really loved about that, is that everything he was doing was oriented towards turtling. But once he realized that, hey, my opponent's getting kind of greedy here, and he's trying to throw me off by being intimidating, he just went ahead and waltzed in and did a whole bunch of damage. So I like that a lot. So that guy says, what made Protoss choose to go carrier, knowing that Terran's push was proving to be effective? I think it's that, this is the way I'd put it. So you heard me say that with harassment, you have to wait a little bit before you push, because you need to let the damage you did to your opponent's economy take effect. In that period of time, you know that, as Protoss, you know that you're kind of safe from pushing, because Terran sacrificed a lot. And if you can get carriers quickly enough, not only do you know that you're not going to be attacked in this whole period of time, but also, whenever you do get attacked, you have these monstrous carriers that can hold off whatever doom push the Terran has to offer. Because really, a Templar Dragoon carrier combination is like the hardest thing to deal with as Terran. It is so cost-effective, that mix for Protoss. So I think the reason that that Perfectman is going for this is because he thought he had a little bit more of a window than he perhaps actually did. So consequently, this means that... sorry, I'm going to drink some green tea. So consequently, he went for the carriers, hoping that he could get him out in time, but it just didn't quite come out in time. And a good question is, a good follow-up is, well, I saw the carriers come out around the time the push was already beginning. Why is that? Why did he opt to go to carriers then? And the answer is that there's a lot of pre-stuff that's involved with the carriers, like getting the Templar, having that gateway count, expanding in that pattern. And once that's all in effect, it's actually detrimental to deviate violently from it, It's kind of like, if you're going 3-hatch Mutalisk as Zerg, and you see the Terran player throw down a bunch of turrets, you don't suddenly go, oh, well, I'm not going to make Mutalisks now, I'm going to instead make a bunch of Lurkers, Rather than that, you try to maximize the effectiveness of the Mutalisk because your build's geared toward it. So he's trying to maximize the effectiveness of his carriers because his build's geared towards it. So Phoenix says, gas steal is so annoying and common in maps like Matchpoint and Destination. And I just want to also add to that, what Phoenix is also saying is that it's really common on 2 or 3 player maps where you can comfortably send a first probe out knowing that you're going to almost certainly get to your opponent's base. So he says, what do you recommend to do for me to do against it if he instead of expanding, he goes Dragoons? essentially what you're saying is, what do you do if your opponent does something similar to what Stork did against Flash in the Ever OSL round of 16? And what I would respond with is, you should do what Flash did. I really like just expanding right away if you get your gas stolen. I personally prefer to get the barracks out before the command center, just because you can use your Marines to kill off any pesky scouting probe. You can use them to start wailing down on the gas in your main. It already completes the tech needed to get the tanks, and you gotta have some defense at the front. And once you do that early expand and get those Marines out, and the Dragoons are coming, you simply have to rely on having a whole bunch of SCVs repair that bunker, which might feel kind of weird and uncomfortable, but really it's not that big of a deal. You're gonna lose, 150 minerals or so repairing it, but you've got a super early expansion, so that more than makes up for it. And your opponent's already sacrificed some money trying to harass you early on. So that's the way that, just sort of think about that. So let's see here. Lex says, why would the Protoss continue massing carriers after the Terran had massed Goliaths? Would moving back to Zealots and Dragoons be a more effective counter? In fact, not. Really, if you're in the situation that Perfectman is in, you do need to get to this critical number of 6, 7, 8 carriers to be really effective. Because if you have like 2 or 3 carriers, the Terran really can just get like 6 or 7 Goliaths and then just continue to walk over you with the rest of his ground units. The ground army was just so big that no matter what sort of ground units the Protoss tried to make, the Terran's army was just way too big, so it would have evaporated anyways. So in that period of time where there was that enormous Terran ground push, and the Protoss push had just, the counteroffensive had just failed. Protoss really did not have that many units, but he just had some carriers. The carriers is the only tool he has to whittle down that army, so then way later he can end up getting a bunch of ground units. Unfortunately, that way later to get a bunch of ground units never actually happened because we saw that Perfectman lost all his expansions immediately. So I do think that it is very smart to play between getting a bunch of carriers once you get 6, 7, or 8 of them, to switch back to getting a bunch of ground units, very similar to how Stork did against Flash in the Ever OSL round 16. But it's important not to do that too early. Obviously, in the later stages of the game, bouncing back between those unit compositions can screw Terran up because he has to have so many Goliaths. But if you do it too early on, a Terran who literally has a pure Goliath army will end up crushing you pretty easily. So always something to be careful of. You need to get like that 8, 9 carrier count before you can really start swapping back. Alternatively, you can just get 2 Stargates and constantly make carriers out of those and constantly make ground units, and that's a good way to have a nice unit composition mix. You don't have to do the bounce back and forth, but one of those 2 I think is most important. So Die says, Sir Day 9, do you think the Fluke Master Shine will beat Movie because of the imbalance of El Nino in game 1 and 5? I'm only going to talk briefly on this because I want to stick to the game, but it was, useful enough thing to say because I don't actually think El Nino's that imbalanced. I really don't buy too much into statistics. I mean, ever since Arcadia was, I think, 15-0 for Zerg in favor of Terran, and then a few games later, after a while, like 20 games passed, it was 17-17 in Zerg versus Terran. Terrans had won 15 of the next 17 games, or excuse me, 17 of the next 19 games to even it back out again. So these sorts of things don't really bother me too much, but, most importantly, I just hope it's a really awesome series, and I kind of would like Movie to win, because I would just like to see Terran vs. Protoss final. I think that would be awesome. So Hart says, oh no, that was... Oh yeah, Hart says, you talk a lot about Toss and Terran, and it sounds like you like Toss the best. Why is that? I don't know. I guess Protoss is totally awesome. I just like a lot of Protoss players quite a bit, because when they win, it's just such a forceful way to win, and that's always like so awesome. And plus, like, you know, I've played Zerg so much, so I've experienced all the pains and everything, and all the, you know, the really fun victories. And it's really awesome to see some other players do that with the other races, you know, that obviously I wouldn't be able to execute nearly as well. So since we've been going for 15 minutes, I will just take 2 more questions. I'm going to go ahead and mute it and just take these last few bits. Wilco says, what techniques can I use to improve as fast as possible in only a short period of time, assuming I'm ready to spend a whole lot of time on StarCraft? This is what I would recommend. Pick one build in one matchup on one map and just repeat the hell out of it. Try to get it as narrow as you can to these little timings early on, and focus heavily on macro, because this is what will end up happening. As you're macroing so well, it becomes very clear where the holes in your game are, right? So if I move out with a big push, I always use this example. I love this example because this has happened to me so many times. If you move out with a huge push, or you encounter your opponent's army in this big battle, and you get raped, if you have a whole bunch of money left over, like if you have like 1,000 money in the bank, or 1,000 minerals and gas, you might say something like, well, maybe if I built those guys I would have held it off, maybe not. I can't tell if it's something wrong with my strategy or if it's something wrong with my macro. But if you're macroing really well, when you move out with that army, if you get raped, you can say, aha, there is something wrong with my strategy, because I'm executing it as well as possible, and still this isn't working. So that's the first thing. One matchup, one map, one build, focusing very hard on it. The second thing is to establish a lot of relative timings for yourself. Whoopsie daisies, I dropped the pen that I use as my little fixation for my fingers to twiddle throughout the games. With relative timing, what I mean is that, and also establishing timings and triggers for yourself, is that a lot of people seem to just think, oh, I'm just going to play a lot and I'll just get good. You need to declare what it is you're practicing. You need to say something like, I'm playing Terran versus Protoss, I'm going to early expand, and I'm going to do a timing push. A 5-factory timing push before I get an armory. That's my goal in this matchup. And then what you say is, your first question is, when do I push out? You shouldn't just say, well, I'll just play a few games and figure it out. You should say, I'm going to move out exactly when I have, 6 tanks, or I'm going to move out when my geyser says 3,800 gas. Or 3,000 gas. By the way, that's a really good thing to use your timing, is your refinery, because you almost always take it at the same time really early every game, and it's a really consistent metric. So you say, oh, I'm going to move out right when I'm at 3,000 gas. Let's say that's your timing. You do the early expand, you get the 5 factories out, and at 3,000 gas you push, and you get crushed. Then you say, okay, I'm going to adjust it to move out when I'm at 2,500 gas. So you do that, and you're doing great, right? You've established this timing for yourself. Kind of naively, you're just saying, I'm doing it now. You don't know why it's good, you just know that it's good. And then, let's say you're having a lot of trouble against a player who's greedy, who goes one gateway, expands, and then expands again before Robo are adding on more gateways. Then you say something like, okay, well, I'm going to move out right at 2,500 gas, unless I scout him doing that very greedy build, in which case I'm going to move out at 3,500 gas. A full 1,000 gas earlier I'm going to move out. And then you try that, and now that's working effectively. And now all of a sudden you're in this great shape, and suddenly you say, but I'm noticing that my push just does not work at all if I'm against 2 base arbiters. So suddenly you have established that most of the time you're doing this 2,500 gas push. In a few limited circumstances, you're doing this 3,500 gas push. And against 2 base arbiter, you're just expanding and playing passively and getting a whole bunch of armories quickly. So, you're just establishing all your own deviations because you declared them, and you now know how to adjust them. Because, imagine if you're that Terran player and you move out with your first push and you're like, oh, it didn't work. What do I work on? I don't know. Was your macro okay? Was your building placement off? Was the timing bad? Is the strategy bad? If you make it that the one thing you're going to adjust is the timing of this attack, that's the one variable you're moving around, you learn so much more quickly. There's no guesswork involved. You're just making solid progress one step at a time. So that is my long-winded answer, and I'm sticking to it. Tun says, you said earlier in PvP, after doing a storm drop and a good follow-up was an expansion. If you did significant damage with the drop, Tun says, if you did significant damage with the drop, wouldn't the main option for you, and I muted him. And when he didn't get the second half of his question. So, Ton, I eagerly await the second half of your question. So, the first half, once again, is that after the storm drop, you said that expanding is a good follow-up. Wouldn't the main option for your opponent be to all in? So, sorry, I'm trying to combine two questions at once. Let me try this one more time. Ton says, you said earlier that in Protoss vs. Protoss, after doing a storm drop, that a good follow-up was an expansion. If you did significant damage with the drop, wouldn't the main option for your opponent be to all in? So wouldn't it be a better idea to add on gates and keep yourself safe while keeping your advantage? There we go. So that's a great question. Now that I'm actually able to read, took me a little while, but reading is essential. The phonics program is oh so helpful. So in that circumstance, obviously you shouldn't take an expansion if it's safe, or excuse me, if it's unsafe. But what I guess I'm trying to say is that whatever option you end up doing, make sure it's not attacking immediately or even really close. You can add on more gateways to make sure you don't die to some sort of massive counterattack. You can add on more gateways to continue putting pressure on your opponent, not necessarily attacking, but putting pressure on him. But just as long as you're not doing something like attacking is the main focus. That's why I think that expanding is such a good option, because let's assume that both of you are even in terms of units. Let's say that you did identical builds in this Protoss vs. Protoss, so you're even in units. But then you storm drop your opponent. If he attacks you because you have even-sized armies, you're going to come out on top because he has to go to you across the map, and you're the defender, so you have that advantage. So your expansion is incredibly, incredibly safe in that circumstance. And it puts even more pressure on your opponent. Your opponent's kind of going, oh, I got to reestablish my economy. And then all of a sudden he's looking at you, and you're taking another base. They're just trying to reestablish foothold on their own bases. That's like a huge stress, you know. So that's essentially what I'm trying to illustrate with that little description there. So that, I've been going for about an hour now. So right when I get off, I'm going to go ahead and upload or put the links to yesterday's game up on the Day 9 Daily thread. I'm running a little bit low on storage space, so what I'm going to do is remove the first 10 Day 9 Dailies, and then once I do another 10, I'll just go ahead and keep removing the previous 10. I have absolutely everything saved, so obviously they'll never go out of style, and maybe I'll have like old school Wednesdays where I'll re-upload all the old ones. But yeah, that's going to be about it. So on Thursday, I'll be doing my analysis of the map match point. I'll be doing 8 or 9 just mid-games of various pro matches. I'm going to be doing Protoss vs. Protoss and Zerg vs. Terrans on that map, just to take 2 matchups and look extensively at the mid-game and see how that sort of plays out. So yeah, that should be quite a bit of fun. If any of you are looking a little bit more for what I'm referring to, you can look at my analysis of Fighting Spirit that I did in Day 9 Daily number 20. So the matches are on, so I do in fact have to go. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for me. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and tune in to the Team Liquid Star League on Saturday when Noni is playing against Idra, and then for me again on Sunday as I analyze some round 2 replays. Oh baby, peace out, and thanks so much, everybody. Cheers!